Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, Senior Editor at Forbes. The 2024 Summer Olympics are continuing to play out, and among this year's competitors are 37 athletes who represent the Olympic refugee team. Here to tell us more about these athletes is Kelly Clements. She is the Deputy High Commissioner for the UN Refugee Agency. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. You're speaking to us from Geneva, and we so appreciate your time.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So let's dive right in. I mentioned 37 athletes are on this team. Who are they? What do we need to know about the Refugee Olympic team?
Well, you mentioned the number, and that's notable. I was in Rio 8 years ago when we had the first Refugee Olympic team under the auspices of the International Olympic Committee, and there was just over a dozen at that point. So we're talking about 3 times as many athletes. They represent 15 national committees who have put them forward as potential athletes that could compete for the Olympics. And they're competing in 12 different sports. And the sports range from everything from taekwondo to canoeing to boxing. And they are basically competing under the moniker of the Refugee Olympic team and the Olympic flag as opposed to their own, because these are individuals who have sought asylum, have refugee status in countries around the world.
So you mentioned the 15 agencies that put them forward for this team. So would that be the country in which they are seeking refuge? That country
Right.
puts them on your radar, and that's what helps get them on this team?
They nominate them to the IOC, and the IOC has a process to look at their qualifications from an athletic perspective. And if they meet that criteria, then the IOC coordinates with UNHCR, who communicates with the government about their refugee status to basically validate that they are indeed refugees. And this team, they're extraordinary athletes, obviously, at the elite of their respective games. But they're also individuals that are coming from all over the world, and it's a very diverse group of athletes. These national committees are, the countries like Spain, US, Canada, UK, that have put these athletes forward. But because of what's happening in the world today, Maggie, we're looking at a situation where you can't see one part of the globe and not see a world in crisis or a world that's burning. And so these are refugees that many have harrowing stories of loss and families that they may be separated from or who have perished. But these are also athletes that have been able now to have been given an opportunity for a fresh start. And these countries, and with the support, obviously, of IOC and the Olympic Refuge Foundation, have been able to train to be provided scholarship and to be able to then compete at a place that I think all of us only dream about. So it's really a lot of excitement. You see incredible athletes, but behind these athletes are stories that are more than compelling.
We'll get into some of those stories in a second, but I want to reflect on the numbers because this team is relatively new. You mentioned the Rio Olympics was the first time we saw them, just less than 10 years ago. So is the growing number of athletes on the Refugee Olympic team a sign of better outreach to these athletes, or is it a sign of the worsening refugee crisis around the world? And I should note there are roughly 120 million people around the globe who are displaced or who have sought refuge from where they had been living and are currently in crisis. So Kelly, is it that you guys and the asylum countries are getting better at recognizing, okay, these are athletes who athletically have achieved Olympic status, or is it a sign of a worsening crisis?
Maggie, I think it's a little bit of both, quite frankly. When we engaged in discussions with the International Olympic Committee back in preparation for the 2016 Games, and this idea came about, it was also at about the time that we were recognizing that sport is not just fun or a test of one's personal abilities, but sport can protect. And sport can be a way, particularly for youth, and you mentioned that 120 million figure, 60% of the programs that through sport that we implement with partners, including the ORF, the Olympic Refuge Foundation, these partners, and I can talk about that more if you like, these are activities that we have in some of the almost 100 countries around the world. We've got operations in about 135 countries globally to support our broader efforts to protect, assist, and find solutions for displacement. But we see sport as a very key part of protection, and including refugees, not just in programs that may be a short-term nature, humanitarian response, a way to provide some life-saving measure, but it is in the long term, if refugees and refugee youth in particular are included in a sports activity, if they have the opportunity to be able to find an outlet, it improves. We see healing is faster. We see possibilities for development. We see these refugee kids grow. And in terms of those communities where they find themselves, and these 15 national committees that have put these athletes forward as the best of the best, these are communities that have embraced and included these athletes as those that obviously are at the pinnacle of their sports, but they're also new members of their communities, and they need safety while their countries may be in turmoil, and they need a way to be able to express themselves and find a way for that social cohesion in the new communities in which they find themselves. So from our perspective, the sport portfolio, if I can put it that way, has been really a win-win in terms of the partnerships. And maybe I can talk about the partnerships very briefly, but we have I think it's about 190 partners now that we're working with in as I said, just over 90 countries around the globe, with local actors, non-governmental organizations, international organizations, some of the sports federations, community-based groups, women-led groups, and so on, to include as well sport in their protection work, which we've seen has been a very powerful way to be able to assist, particularly young people that have been through so much.
Well, it's interesting as you talk about partners, and I think about the private sector and the business community that so often engages with Forbes. I'm also thinking about sponsorships, and that is how a lot of athletes get their income. So are you seeing corporate sponsors come in to support some of these athletes?
It's each time. So this is the third team that has competed at the Olympics, and each time the buzz increases even more than the last. And I don't think it's just because of the numbers of athletes competing and how great they are. They really truly are, from that time in Rio to Tokyo to now, obviously in Paris. But I think there also is, and sponsorship is important, support is important. And what happens after these athletes compete, they don't become, first of all, they're Olympians for the rest of their lives. But many of them, and we saw repeat athletes in Tokyo who had competed in Rio, I would expect the same that would be in place in Los Angeles during the next Olympics. These athletes continue to compete. They continue to contribute to their communities when they go back home. And they are supported by a number of individuals, but importantly by the Olympic Refuge Foundation, who has provided them scholarship, both to allow them to get ready for this huge competition that they're competing in the last 2 weeks, but also what happens to them from here. And some of the incredible supporters, and we have goodwill ambassadors who were former Olympians. We have high-level supporters who continue to talk about not just their athletic experience, but what their experience has been as being a refugee, and why the world needs to care, and why all of us need to come together, private sector, community-based organizations. Obviously, it's got to take a whole of society approach to ensure that this world can be as one to the extent possible.
I think stories are such an important part of forging partnerships and finding support. And I know, Kelly, you are in Geneva right now, but you are headed to Paris very, very soon to watch some finals. Can you tell us some specific stories and specific athletes that we should have our eye on as the Olympics continue to unfold?
Oh gosh, well the athlete that I'll see on one of the first competitions when I arrive tomorrow is Cindy Ngamba. And Cindy now trains in the United Kingdom. She's from Cameroon. She's been boxing for a very long time, but that's not the the sport she started with. But she's thrown herself completely into this competition. And what I'm told about Cindy, and again, I'm looking forward to meeting her. Filippo Grandi, the High Commissioner, has had opportunities to talk with her earlier in the competition. But she is set to receive the first medal of a refugee athlete at the Olympics out of these three. And it's a very proud moment. It's a proud moment for her athletic achievement. And I think it's a proud moment for her to talk about, her own experience and what it has meant in terms of representing the Refugee Olympic team and the important support that she has received from her host country, from the United Kingdom. And Cindy, with 36 other athletes that come from all corners of the globe in every continent, can talk about the experiences they've had in their host communities, but also the experiences that they had, unfortunately, which caused them to seek that safety. So they're all very individual experiences of loss, but what we have seen in almost every story is also one of hope. And one where there is opportunity if we look at refugees, not as a number, not as a victim or just a beneficiary of support, but as incredible athletes, as contributors to their community, and as people that can give back to those communities from everything from an economic point of view to a social to a cultural, and enriches the society in which we live.
So that's Cindy Naganda, and she will be competing in boxing, and she is set to, no matter what, she will medal. So that will be the first medal for the Refugee Olympic team.
Exactly.
That is exciting.
Yes.
Any other specific athletes that our audience should know about?
Well, I understand that I will be able to see competitions of between 8 and 9. So many of the refugees now, and they can only stay in the team facility for 3 days after their competition. So I'm not going to be able to see all of them and have a chance to talk with them. But some of them, one, I know that, from the Rio Games, everyone is very familiar with our Goodwill Ambassador, Yusra Mardini, who I have known over these 8 years, who's an extraordinary story. But there are other stories like her of people that have performed really harrowing exits from their communities, sometimes with their families, sometimes without. They've been able to find new life and new opportunity. And obviously, we're there to cheer them on, and we hope the rest of the world will as well.
What do you hope emerges from this Olympics, either from your trip to Paris or from these athletes' performance? Are you looking for more support? Are you looking for a message to the world? What do you hope to be able to say to me if we were to talk in 6 months that this moment in time achieved for the refugee team and the broader UN Refugee Agency?
You started with a statistic at the beginning of this conversation, Maggie, about 120 million. And that's often what people hear. And then there isn't much more, in terms of that's a number. What does it mean? Well, it's actually the size of Japan, if you want to put that in perspective. But what I think these games represent is an opportunity for us to see the people behind the numbers, the real individuals who have been affected by war, conflict, persecution, and the welcoming that countries have provided for them in their new home communities, and what inclusion can really mean. And I think with that kind of a message, rather than talking about refugees as the other or something to solve, we do need to solve issues of displacement. Those are political issues, issues that are deeply rooted in circumstances well beyond the control of families that are affected by this. But the games themselves show that, obviously we see these elite athletes, but we also see that there is a story behind them becoming these athletes. What happened to them before? And how can the world really come together and unite to support, but also to include?
Now, you mentioned the 2028 Los Angeles Summer Olympics. How many athletes will be on the Refugee Olympic team then? And also, is there a chance that some of these athletes, you mentioned, Cindy's in Great Britain, will will we see some of these athletes competing for their new home and instead of competing under the Refugee Olympic team?
Yeah, and there are choices to be made there for sure. I have no idea how many may compete in Los Angeles. What I do know is that we've built a foundation along with the IOC and along with the Olympic Refuge Foundation, where with sport being such an important part of what we're trying to do, that our ability to be able to identify the talent out there is much greater. So that network continues to expand. And I think, the very conscious effort that we've made to develop and extend partnerships across the globe in all of these countries means that there'll be at least the opportunity for many more refugees and displaced, at least to be discovered and supported. And so with that, obviously, we couldn't ask for better partners. Obviously, IOC is one, but many other sports federations also contribute, including the Paralympics, UEFA, FIFA. Others have embraced sport as protection. And so in individual sports as well, we have tried to expand the opportunities for athletes, refugee athletes, to be able to compete.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about these athletes. And I look forward to watching Cindy and her 36 colleagues compete over the next several days as the Olympics continue to play out. Have a very safe trip to Paris, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Maggie.